The best choice for defensive coordinator for the Jets in 2026 was a fan favorite as a player. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, January 19th, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and our episode today is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, we are focusing on the Jets' search for a new defensive coordinator. The Jets announced on Friday the 8 candidates they are interviewing to replace Steve Wilkes. I think some of these candidates are good. Some of them are not so good. I'll give you my thoughts on the quality of these 8 candidates on today's show. We'll also talk a little bit about Sam Darnold, who's in the news. I think there's one big mistake Jets fans make when they lament that the team let Sam Darnold go in 2021. We'll talk about that. But let's begin by talking about this search for a defensive coordinator. As you probably remember, the Jets fired Steve Wilkes, their defensive coordinator, after their Week 15 loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was an embarrassing loss. The Jets defense was very bad all season under Wilkes. Unfortunately, things did not improve after Wilkes' firing. Chris Harris, who was part of the coaching staff, he was the defensive backs coach and passing game coordinator, took over for the final 3 weeks, and things did not get any better. So the Jets searching for a new defensive coordinator. Of these 8 candidates, I think there are 3 who really stand out to me. And to me, the top choice is a name who's probably familiar if you're a Jets fan. That's Jim Leonhard. Now, that name's familiar because he was a player for the Jets for 3 years, from 2009 through 2011. He was one of the first free agents the Jets signed after they hired Rex Ryan as their head coach. And there was a good reason the Jets brought Jim Leonhard in. Leonhard had played under Rex Ryan in Baltimore. He was a very, very smart player. Rex Ryan instituted a complicated defensive scheme. You need a smart safety, a smart guy at the back of your defense to help run things. Leonard was the quarterback of the Jets defense Rex Ryan's first 3 years, which included 2 trips to the AFC Championship game. Leonard, since his playing days ended, has gone into coaching. He had a successful run as an assistant coach at the University of Wisconsin, which is his alma mater. That culminated in a stint as the interim head coach a few years back when Wisconsin fired Paul Chryst in season. Leonard did a decent job as the head coach, as the interim head coach, but was passed over when Wisconsin hired Luke Fickell. So Leonard went to Illinois for a little bit, and now he's with the Denver Broncos. He is their assistant head coach and passing game coordinator on the defensive side of the ball. Leonard is highly respected in the coaching industry. There are lots of people who believe he's a rising star in the coaching industry. Now, you have to take that with a grain of salt. Aaron Glenn was also a guy who was a rising star in the coaching industry. But Leonard and Glenn do have some ties. Glenn was an assistant position coach for Leonard near the end of Leonard's playing career when he was with the Cleveland Browns. So there's a little bit of background knowledge. Would Leonard take this job? You know, I love Jim Leonhard. As somebody who loves Jim Leonhard, I almost don't want him to take this job because I think it's a really tough job to put yourself into. But as a Jets fan, I would be very intrigued by Jim Leonhard. He checks a lot of boxes for me. I've been saying for quite a while that I feel like in many ways, one of the issues with Steve Wilkes is that he and Aaron Glenn were too similar. They're both very old school. They have old school mentalities. And I don't think that's necessarily all a bad thing. I think there are some areas where maybe an old school mentality is helpful. One of the areas I believe old school mentality could be helpful is in practice habits. I think that teams maybe don't practice hard enough in today's NFL. And there's a limit to what you can do. The players union has negotiated with the league, and practices cannot be as intense as they used to be. But I think teams maybe don't push the envelope enough. That said, I felt like a lot of Wilkes' schemes were kind of outdated through the course of the season. I felt like very easy to pick up where the Jets blitz packages were coming from. I felt like there were times where they were over aggressive with their blitzes when they just didn't have the talent on the back end of their defense to play man to man. Now, it's a little dangerous to try and extrapolate what Leonard did when he was defensive coordinator in college and say he'll do things exactly the same in the pros. And the defense Leonard ran when he was in charge at Wisconsin is different from the one he's helping implement Vance Joseph's scheme in Denver. So, you don't know what principles he's going to bring over. But Leonard runs the type of scheme I think Aaron Glenn could use. Leonard relies on a lot on what are known as simulated pressures. What does that mean? Well, think about blocking this way. In pass protection, the offensive line has a numeric advantage. You have 5 blockers versus 4 pass rushers, unless the other team blitzes, unless the defense blitzes. So that means you can double team someone all the time. What Leonard does a lot is he'll walk a guy up to the line of scrimmage. So it'll be 5-on-5. He'll show blitz, but then the guy who's the extra guy kind of backs into coverage. What does that do? Well, the 5th offensive lineman has to account for the guy who's walked up to the line of scrimmage. And he can't immediately help his fellow offensive lineman with a double team because he has to make sure that there's no blitz. And the simulated pressures are helpful because normally when you blitz, you're taking a guy out of coverage. So you're improving your pass rush, but you're weakening your coverage. The simulated pressures, they're kind of the best of both worlds. Leonard also uses, or at least Wisconsin used, a lot of a coverage concept known as pattern matching. And pattern matching is kind of a mix of man and zone coverage. Man-to-man coverage, you're just picking one guy and running with him the entire play. Zone coverage, you're kind of dropping to a spot. And if the ball's thrown in your area, you have to react. Pattern matching is what I would say more like you're reading a route combination. And you have to be able to read it with your teammate. But at the end of the day, what happens is usually there's a guy normally you start like it's a zone play. You don't take him out at the start of the play, but then when someone runs into your zone, you pick him up. And it kind of is the best. If executed properly, it's the best of both worlds. Because one of the challenges with man-to-man coverage is it's tough to stay with another receiver for the entire play because the receiver could run you all the way across the other part of the field. Whereas zone coverage, you just drop to a spot. If you're dropping to a spot, you have all these coverage guys dropping to a spot. There are plenty of holes in the coverage. So pattern matching tries to kind of find the best of both worlds where you don't have to run with anybody across the field. You pick them up as they come into your zone. But you also, because you're picking them up and staying with them man-to-man for the rest of the play, you eliminate those holes. You eliminate those passing lanes. Now, the thing that could backfire is if you don't read it correctly, you could take the wrong guy and then somebody could be wide open. A lot of coverage busts in the NFL happen because pattern matching coverage is not executed well. But I think that Leonard's the type of guy who kind of is a good philosophical match with Aaron Glenn because Leonard, he's played for Rex Ryan, Glenn wants to run an aggressive defense, but I think he would add more modern principles to the defense. There were 2 other candidates who kind of intrigued me. One of them is Darante Jones. He's Minnesota's defensive backs coach, worked under Brian Flores, who I have a lot of respect for. I think is one of the top defensive coaches in the NFL. I mean, I think talk about the elite defensive minds in this league. Brian Flores would be on any list. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a guy who's worked under him is automatically going to be Brian Flores or implement his scheme, but Flores, in some broad strokes, runs a defense somewhat similar to what Leonard ran at Wisconsin, but there are differences. Flores likes to load the line of scrimmage. He likes to threaten the zero blitz. He likes to threaten the all-out blitz. And then sometimes he blitzes, sometimes he backs out. And depending on the personnel he's got, depending on the players he's got, sometimes he'll blitz heavily. Other times he won't blitz as much. Flores also uses a lot of pattern matching. He comes from the Bill Belichick New England school where you'll see different approaches depending on who your opponent is. He likes his players to be very versatile. It's not easy. I'm not sure, whether the Jets necessarily have the personnel to run this type of defense, but I think schematically it's a very sound defense. The third guy I'm kind of interested in is Ephraim Banda. He's Cleveland safeties coach, worked under Jim Schwartz, a guy who I think in many ways is different philosophically from Aaron Glenn. Now, Schwartz has a pretty effective blitz package, but I think if he had the choice, Schwartz would depend on his pass rushers, his 4 guys up front. Not sometimes Schwartz has to blitz if he doesn't have the personnel, but he likes to stick his pass rushers at what's known as the wide 9 alignment, which means you're really putting them out wide. Robert Saleh ran this a lot. You put your defensive end at a really wide angle just to try and give him a good angle to get to the quarterback. But Jim Schwartz, I think, another excellent defensive mind, somebody off his tree, could be potentially a good fit. But I think of the choices the Jets have interviewed, Jim Leonhard's my guy. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to continue talking about this list of potential Jets defensive coordinators because there are some who I would be really unenthused with, including perhaps the biggest name on the list. That may surprise you, but I'll explain why I'm not a big fan of Wink Martindale ahead here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Hey guys, the draft pick positions are set, and like the Jets, so many teams are looking for their franchise quarterback. Have you ever wished to become a pro quarterback and get drafted first overall by the Jets? Well, now you can. There's a mobile game just for you called Ultimate QB Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of a number one draft pick quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness to help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty. This is the number one QB career mode game on the mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. Sign contracts, train and upgrade yourself, build chemistry, and evolve your teammates. Give input to your general manager on roster moves, play the actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. You'll deal with the ups and downs of a QB career, from rookie nerves to playoff drama, and every choice shapes your journey. Ultimate QB is totally free to play, has no ads, and works 100% offline. Perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or two on the go. Just head over to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search for Ultimate QB in your app store. And we've got something special just for you guys. Use the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store to get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB Football Legend. QB1. It's your legacy. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked in every moment than with Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where it's always good to be right. With football season coming down to the final stretch, now's the perfect time to close it strong. Prize Picks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections. No drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. Prize Picks is incredibly easy to get started. Pick two or more players and choose more or less on their projections. It makes watching games way more engaging, especially during the playoffs and the big game. It's a great way to keep playing fantasy football, even after season-long leagues are finished. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And thank you for making Locked On the number one sports podcast network. If you have not already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It includes access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Jets compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app, along with an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. Go to lockedonnyjets.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. On today's episode of Locked On Jets, we are talking about the search for a new Jets defensive coordinator. The team fired Steve Wilkes near the end of the season, and on Friday released a slate of 8 candidates who have been interviewed for the job. And say what you will about the Jets, there were no leaks in the early stages of this process. It was kind of odd how little noise there was about the Jets search for a new defensive coordinator. No reporters got access to this information before they made the announcement. There are some familiar names on this list if you're a Jets fan or if you're an NFL fan. And I think the biggest name that the Jets interviewed is a longtime defensive assistant in the league, Don Wink Martindale. You may remember him. He was most recently the defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan. Prior to that, he had a stint in New York as the Giants defensive coordinator. Prior to that, he worked with the Baltimore Ravens, where he coached some highly ranked defenses. So you look at the statistics, particularly the early Baltimore days, you might say, well, Wink Martindale looks pretty good. I don't love him as a fit for the Jets, though. If you listen to what Michigan fans had to say, and if you listen to what Giants fans had to say near the end of his tenure there, it sounds like a lot of the same issues the Jets had with Steve Wilkes. Now, I do think Martindale's a higher quality defensive coordinator than Steve Wilkes. I don't mean to suggest that things would go just as badly. You hope they would not, particularly considering the Jets have all these resources this offseason to upgrade their personnel. And while I think that you will probably see more of the resources dedicated to fixing the offense, the Jets are still going to bring in better players on the defensive side of the ball, presumably. But, Martindale comes with a lot of complaints. Fans who've watched his team say, he's too stuck blitzing. He's too stubborn. That some of his schemes kind of lack that modern touch. He doesn't use the pattern matching concepts that Jim Leonhard does. Some of his designs are very predictable. I think that for a certain type of team, Martindale could make sense. But one of my big focuses for the Jets as they've embarked on this search is finding somebody who complements Aaron Glenn, because I think that even though Glenn has reportedly been hands off with the defense, he still has a vision for what he wants. But I think one of the big parts of building a coaching staff is there's certain strengths and certain weaknesses every coach brings. And your job is to find a staff, hire people who kind of make up for what you're lacking. And I don't think Glenn has a great modern schematic mind. I think there are certain things he does bring to the table. And look, I've been very critical of Glenn, but I do think that there are certain aspects, at least what we saw in Detroit, and maybe not so much this last year with the Jets. Uh, but I think he needs somebody with a more modern mind than Wink Martindale. So I would not be a fan of Wink Martindale. And to be honest with you, a lot of these candidates are not guys I would be terribly interested in if I were the Jets. Chris Harris, who finished the season as the Jets interim defensive coordinator over those final 3 games. Look, he had no talent, but I don't think he really impressed that much. I mean, he was the defensive backs coach this year. He was the defensive passing game coordinator. I think that he's got to own a lot of the failure that the Jets had on that side of the ball. I'm guessing he'll stick around. I think Glenn likes him. Glenn liked him enough to promote him in season after the Jets fired Steve Wilkes. But I think that when you have the interim job, it's got to be a condition that you succeed with the interim job to even be seriously considered as the permanent replacement. I didn't see anything over those 3 weeks that suggested Chris Harris should be the guy going forward. Another name, this one you might be familiar with if you're a Jets fan, Jim O'Neill. Actually spent some time with Glenn on the Detroit defensive coaching staff, but O'Neill was another guy who coached with the Jets in the early Rex Ryan days. He's gone on. He's had other jobs in the league. He was a defensive coordinator under former Jets defensive coordinator Mike Pettin with the Cleveland Browns when Pettin was their head coach. He was also the San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator. He was on Rex Ryan's staff from 2009 through 2012, originally as a defensive quality control coach. He then ascended to a defensive assistant defensive backs coach. The resume here is just not terribly impressive, and the track record's just not terribly impressive for Jim O'Neill. So from the standpoint that, he's worked with Aaron Glenn in the past, that's not such a bad thing. I think that Glenn has to have someone he's comfortable with, but that may not be the best thing in the world, actually. Working with Aaron Glenn, maybe one of the issues with Steve Wilkes was that Glenn was a little bit too comfortable with him. Jim O'Neill, I think that's a really tough sell for me. I don't think that there's a great track record there. Now, he was in some really tough situations. Those 2 years in Cleveland, they did not have good talent. The year in San Francisco, this was not the Harbaugh era, and it was not the Shanahan era. There was a stretch where the 49ers had 4 coaches in 4 years. The year he was in San Francisco, that was the Chip Kelly year. You may have forgotten about it, but Chip Kelly was the coach of the Eagles for 3 years, got fired, actually got immediately hired as the San Francisco 49ers head coach, only lasted 1 year. He was one and done. Jim O'Neill was his defensive coordinator. So, not that O'Neill was in great situations, but yeah, I'd like to see somebody with a little bit better track record of success if we're going to go in that direction. Another candidate, DeMarcus Covington, who this past season was the Packers defensive line coach and defensive run game coordinator. Before that, last year, he was the Patriots defensive coordinator under Gerard Mayo. Again, he was not in a great situation with New England, but I think immediately when you hear someone was part of the Gerard Mayo coaching staff, that's kind of something might make you hesitate a little bit, because we've seen how much better, and look, the talent level is obviously higher in New England this year, and Drake May's taken a huge step forward, but that Gerard Mayo coaching staff did not do a great job. He was the run game coordinator this year for Green Bay. Packers run defense took a step back this year. It should be noted, though, that they did trade one of their best run-stopping linemen, Kenny Clark, as part of the Micah Parsons deal. It was clearly worth it for Green Bay, but they did trade a guy who was very good at stopping the run. I don't know how much I blame Covington for the failures of the teams he's been on, but again, I don't think that there's a lot that stands out that tells me that this is a great candidate to be the next Jets defensive coordinator. The final candidate the Jets interviewed is a member of the Dolphins coaching staff. His name is Matthew Arroyo. And he's been the Dolphins cornerbacks coach the last 2 years. Prior to that, he was an assistant defensive backs coach for a couple of years. And prior to that, he was coaching in college. He coached at Springfield College, he coached at Boston College, and then he coached at Yale. Now, young guy, maybe he's a rising star in this league. It's tough to say based on the resume. I was not impressed by the players he coached at Miami this year. The fact that he's only been a position coach in the NFL for 2 years, kind of a red flag to me. The fact that, he was not that far removed from coaching at Yale. Look, I think there are lots of great coaches who are at smaller colleges, but I question whether he's ready at this point to be a coordinator in the National Football League. And, while I do think that it's good to have someone young, I also would like some degree of substantive experience because this is going to be a massive job that you're taking on. You have to essentially rebuild the defense from scratch. Jim Leonhard's a young coach. Jim Leonhard has a ton of substantive experience. So these are candidates. I'd say 5 of the 8 candidates are guys who, for various reasons, I have big questions about. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to a former Jet who has been in the spotlight. Sam Darnold is going to the NFC Championship game, and that has brought a lot of criticism to the Jets franchise because the Jets unceremoniously traded Sam to the Carolina Panthers in 2021. They drafted Zach Wilson. Sam's gone on to have success. The Jets have not since they traded Sam. I think the criticism of the Jets, though, misses the mark. I think that there's fair criticism of the Jets regarding Sam Darnold, but people are missing the most critical point. And I'll explain what I mean continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The conference championship games are coming, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bet you like most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boost you want to apply. The boost lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. These boosts give even more juice to the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet on something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bet feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. Let's turn our attention now to an old friend. Sam Darnold, the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, is heading to the NFC Championship game. He is the quarterback of the top-seeded team in the NFC, and he is a player the Jets selected 3rd overall in the 2018 NFL Draft. Many people, myself included, when the Jets drafted Sam, thought that he would be the franchise quarterback here for a long time. If you're a longtime listener, you know I was very, very high on Sam when the Jets drafted him out of USC. His Jets career did not go well, though, and after 3 seasons, the team traded him to Carolina in 2021. The Jets got a 2nd-round pick, a 4th-round pick, and a 6th-round pick in return for Darnold, who many people, myself included, called a bust. Darnold only lasted 2 seasons in Carolina. He ended up being benched there himself, spent the season as a backup quarterback in San Francisco, actually went to a Super Bowl as a backup quarterback in 2023, then went to Minnesota last year, got his big break. J.J. McCarthy got injured. He was the top draft pick by Minnesota that year. Sam got to start the whole year, led the Vikings to a 14-3 record, but things ended ugly. They lost the final game of the season against Detroit, which cost them the 1 seed in the NFC. Sam played poorly in that game. He also played poorly in a wild card loss to the Los Angeles Rams. I think that the way the season ended contributed to the Vikings letting him go. The Seahawks then signed him. Seahawks went on to be the 1 seed of the NFC, and now they're heading to the conference championship game. Now the narrative, I don't need to tell you. How did the Jets let the quarterback of the number 1 seed get away? I think that this mindset is misguided. And I think this is the sort of thing that's very similar to the way the Jets are frequently misjudged. Because I think so often we act like the Jets are one move away from greatness, or if they hadn't made that one move, they'd be great. I think we we condense things down to the idea that the Jets were one move away, either in the past or are one move away in the future from greatness. And the issue with the Jets is that the problems are much deeper. And I think Sam and the way things have played out with Sam are actually a good example of this. Now, if you remember the context of where things were when the Jets traded Sam Darnold, there was really no way it was going to work for him in New York. I think Sam would probably be the first one to tell you that he needed a fresh start somewhere else. When a team drafts a quarterback high, particularly in New York, there's lots of talk about his skill set. There's lots of talk about, pretty much every attribute he's got. And when a quarterback struggles, we talk about how he struggles reading a defense. We talk about how he doesn't throw an accurate ball. We talk about how his mechanics break down. But the thing we forget is these are people. And when you're losing every week, and when you're the lightning rod for criticism, you just lose all your confidence. It's really hard. And, when I talk about the Jets potentially drafting a quarterback early, either this year, in the past, in the future, and I say he needs to sit, it's not so much because I think that sitting necessarily in a vacuum makes a quarterback more likely to succeed. It's more that if a quarterback's not ready, he's going to go out and struggle. And when a quarterback struggles, he just becomes the lightning rod for criticism, and he loses his confidence. We saw Sam lose his confidence here. That last season in 2020 was horrific. I mean, he was just terrible. There's no other way to put it. He completed 59.6% of his passes. It averaged 6.1 per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, passer rating of 72.7, a QBR of 32.9. It's tough to blame the Jets for moving on. And I'll take it a step further. People say they should have kept him. They shouldn't have traded him. If they brought him back for 2021, the Jets roster was awful. And, one of the criticisms the Jets get, which is a more valid criticism, which I'm about to get to, is part of the reason they succeeded was the infrastructure around it was terrible. Well, the infrastructure would have been terrible in 2021. And that was the last year of his contract. So if you're of the mindset that Sam would have succeeded in 2021, I think that's tough to believe because he went to a better situation in Carolina than he had with the Jets, and he still failed that year. He needed to take a step back. And I have heard Sam say that, going to San Francisco was one of the best things for him. He learned from Kyle Shanahan for a year. He kind of took a step back and got to learn that, I was forcing too many passes. I was trying to be the hero in New York. There were just things that weren't going to work here. You can't blame the Jets for letting him go. And this brings me to my bigger point, is that the Jets letting Sam Darnold go wasn't the issue. It wasn't the issue when they did it in 2021. The issue was the way the Jets failed to develop Sam. The issue was keeping Mike Maccagnan after his rookie year for 5 months. They kept Maccagnan for 5 months and then fired Maccagnan because he was terrible at his job. But in those 5 months, Maccagnan spent what was then a record amount in free agency. And pretty much the Jets got stuck with a terrible roster that Maccagnan bought for 2 years, the 2 years that sank Sam's tenure in New York. And during this time, they hired Adam Gase as their head coach. And this kind of goes to what I'm talking about. It's not one move with the Jets. It's never one move with the Jets. It's that the Jets are built on a faulty foundation. You can't blame the Jets for moving on from Sam Darnold after the 2020 season. Every team would have done that. I don't think there's a team that would have stuck with Sam after 2020. And even if they had, he would have had a bad season in 2021 because he did in Carolina. And that was the end of his contract. So were the Jets going to keep a guy who in 4 years had no success with the team? They were going to give him a second contract and continue to let him be the starting quarterback? No. Sam didn't have success until 2024. The issue is that clearly there was potential in him. And did they put a good infrastructure around him? Did they build the right team around him? Did they give him a good offensive line? No. Hey, go back and listen to any of my podcasts from 18 to 20. Did they give him a good coach? You can go listen if you want to be entertained by my comments about Adam Gase, because I guarantee you pick any Jets podcast I did between 2019 and 2020, I'm probably complaining about what a terrible coach Adam Gase is. They put a horrible roster around him. I mean, Robbie Anderson was his number one receiver. The offensive line was a joke. The play caller was a joke. These were the issues. This was a guy who could have been developed. And the Jets failed in the bigger way. And I think that this is important to say because it's almost like letting the Jets off the hook for saying, oh, they just should have kept him. Because that's one mistake. Anybody can make one mistake. Everything the Jets did around Sam Darnold was wrong. And these are lessons that need to be learned going forward. Because I feel like we've talked about this over and over, not with just Sam, with other quarterbacks, where the Jets have not been team that's been conducive to developing quarterbacks. And you know what? Woody Johnson deserves to watch Sam Darnold win on Sunday. Woody Johnson deserves to watch Sam Darnold win the Super Bowl, because that's the sort of thing that should like tell Woody, you know what, you're doing things wrong. That this team had a quarterback that was capable of doing good things. That even if he's not the best quarterback in the league, this was a quarterback who was capable of running a winning team. And the Jets need to own that they did not put the conditions necessary for Sam to succeed here. It's not that they let him go. It's that they failed to develop him. That's the real problem with the way the Jets handled Sam Darnold. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Hope you have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.